signed the invitation. The show generated substantial attention, sales, and very good reviews. Clement Greenberg, the formidable critic of the moment, declared in The Nation that Basiotis was, quote, an unadulterated talent, a natural painter, an all painter. He issues with a single jet, deflected by nothing extraneous to painting. 2 or 3 of his larger oils may be masterpieces in several years, once they stop disturbing us by their nervousness. The next slide, please. From 1946 to 1951, 5 galleries in New York City featured the work of the New York School. Betty Parsons, Samuel Coutts, Charles Egan, Sidney Janis, and Art of the Century. During these 6 years, Jackson Pollock had 7 one-person exhibits. Mark Rothko and Hans Hofmann had 6. Adolph Gottlieb, William Basiotis, Ad Reinhardt, and Robert Motherwell, 5. Clifford Still, 4, Bill de Kooning, 3, and Barnett Newman and Franz Klein, 2. Between 1940, the next slide please. Between 1945 and 1970, a quarter century, the United States witnessed the rise and domination of American art that secured our country squarely on the world cultural map. When de Kooning declared that Jackson broke the ice at Pollock's funeral in 1956, he was referring to the notoriety, publicity, and exposure of Pollock, not necessarily his art. Pollock had become a celebrity, our first American artist superstar. De Kooning and many others now lined up seeking to capitalize on the gains Pollock had secured for them. Never had there been so many artists vying for attention. Greek and Greek-American artists had gravitated to New York City for some time to be part of this tribal initiation. Kaldis, Daphnis, Constant, Chios, Basiotis, Zeron, and Stamos all participated and added in varying degrees to the transmission of this new American identity in art. Remarkably, Stamos, at the age of 21, had his first one-person show at Betty Parsons in 1944, the same year as Basiotis. Clement Greenberg's edict on Basiotis proved very powerful and secured him a place for the time being among a generation of artists whose work evoked similar and resounding restlessness. The New York School, Pollock, de Kooning, Rothko, Klein, Still, Gorky, Motherwell, Krasner, Hoffman, Stamos, Gottlieb, Newman, and many others, abstract expressionism would become the mandatory world style in the 1950s. Museums avidly collected it and exhibited it around the whole world, boasting that American art would be condemned if made in the Soviet Union. In 1952, the Museum of Modern Art launched a massive export of abstract expressionist exhibits around the world, formed from their collection and including several works by Basiotis. Alfred Barr, the director of MoMA, referred to these shows as benevolent propaganda. Next slide, please. A decade earlier, most of these artists had worked for the Federal Arts Project under Roosevelt's New Deal, while earning virtually nothing. Now, abstract expressionism was deployed as a Cold War weapon supporting the view that our American artists were the cure to Soviet conformity and suppression. Needless to say, the politics of the United States during the 1930s, 40s, and 50s were charged, highly contested, and difficult. Tracing the developments of abstract expressionism requires grasping that 2 starkly different forces were at play. The struggle of American artists to gain worldwide attention during the most powerful surge in America's influence throughout the world. The result of the enormous wealth created by the entrepreneurial spirit of capitalism. Unsurprisingly, the avant-garde of Europe had taken notice of America as well, earlier in the 20th century, while American collectors gobbled up Picasso and Matisse. Europe's avant-garde simply followed the money source to New York and brought with them the antidote to American social realism, surrealism and abstraction. Next slide, please. An atmosphere of triumph grabbed center stage, and by the 1950s, New York City was the new imperial cultural center of culture, the heir to Paris. While Basiotis inadvertently played an important role in many of these developments, his demeanor was totally at odds with inflated claims, cynical promotion, and almost any kind of excess. Basiotis was a devout painter who did almost nothing but paint. For the next 20 years, he lived in modest comfort on the Upper West Side of New York with his wife, Ethel. He kept a distance from distraction, gave lectures, participated in symposiums, offered advice to young artists, and taught at Hunter, and was highly respected by his peers. He exhibited regularly and was included in numerous major museum exhibits along with other artists of the New York School. Horribly, Basiotis died from lung cancer in 1963 at the age of 50, after consuming 3 packs of cigarettes a day since the age of 9. While clearly at his peak at the time of his death, Basiotis' body of work was cruelly truncated. The next slide, please. In his lifetime, Basiotis came to view his early success painfully, admitting to some, "I have the horror of being easily understood." In reality, his eloquent and calm sensibility set him apart from his contemporaries. His brooding, strange, and melancholic poetry was like nothing else in American art, then and now. In some respects, his association with the New York School proved costly. Basiotis was forever to be measured on the same scale as Rothko, Pollock, de Kooning, Klein, Motherwell, and Gottlieb. Each of these great artists owed something to him and profited from his pioneering ideas. But by nature, Basiotis was slow and cautious and unable to make concessions. He was also remote and reticent and appeared stuck at times while laboring and lingering over his work in a manner so unlike his peers. Basiotis was miscast in the fiction surrounding action painting and equally uncomfortable with the savage posturing of many of his associates. The delicacy of his vision and the effusive lyricism was markedly different, almost narrative, almost mute, and almost invisible. His visual curiosity took him great distances, but the essence of his work was the evocation of reality made deeper by silence, a world without words. For a young Greek American, 21 years of age, and with aspirations to be a painter, arriving in New York City in 1933 from Reading, Pennsylvania, demanded sheer determination. His artistic credentials were pretty thin. A failed drawing class in high school, some caricatures published in the school yearbook in 1925, a dropout from school at the age of 15, some work in a factory specializing in stained glass, a few evening drawing classes, and one prior visit to New York City to see the Henri Matisse retrospective in 1931 at the Museum of Modern Art. Basiotis' primary interest as a teenager had been boxing. His skills with his fists had prompted his mentor, Bobby the Bull Ruttenberg, to offer the young man a career as a professional boxer. In boxing, Basiotis developed skills pertinent to his art: discipline, endurance, agility, and the value of the hand. A handwritten note after Basiotis' death and tucked away in a notebook were copied the words of the great heavyweight champion, Gene Tunney. If there's an extreme form of individualism, it's boxing. You wage your own battle all by yourself. No partners, no comrades in there with you. Like dying, you fight alone. So consider the prize fighter as a spiritual individual, a solitary soul in Travail. In the early 1930s, Basiotis found the conditions in New York appalling, as the city was slowly recovering from the Depression. He later wrote, "The general atmosphere was awful, a continuous wave of poverty, coffee lines, riots. I doubled up with a relative who had a room on 14th Street. Basiotis was unable to afford the $25 a month fee at the Art Students League and attended the National Academy of Design, which was free. His studies took up the mornings and his afternoons were spent visiting galleries. He found work resetting pins in a bowling alley for $8 a week." Next. Basiotis graduated from the National Academy in 1936 and immediately found employment under the Works Project Administration. He taught art at the Queens Children's Museum for 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, making $23.86 a week. In 1938, Basiotis was transferred to the easel division and received a stipend for making 4 paintings a year for the WPA. Basiotis, in 1939, finally meets young, like-minded painters through the WPA. Jackson Pollock, Peter Busa, and Jimmy Ernst. Basiotis later recalled, quote, "The talk was mostly about ideas and painting. There was an unconscious collaboration between artists. Whether you agreed or disagreed was of no consequence. It was exciting and you were compelled to paint over your head." Basiotis was hard on himself as he absorbed the museums and galleries. Art history was everywhere in New York City. But the fascination with new ideas was equally tempting. The Museum of Modern Art featured 2 magnificent exhibits in 1936 dedicated to the principal movements in modern art: Cubism and abstract art, and the fantastic art Dada and Surrealism. Picasso and Surrealism were hotly discussed. Basiotis adopted Surrealist techniques in the belief that the unconscious impulses and fantasies could be harnessed to make art. Since the early 1930s, European artists had flaunted this religion, mastered it, and subsequently shipped it off to America. Surrealism was a slap in the face to the proponents of American regionalism. Thomas Hart Benton, Jackson Pollock's teacher, blamed homosexuals for it. For many Americans, Surrealism exploited a gullible public with the promise of unadulterated and seductive visual material. For Basiotis, Surrealism offered a way to give invention priority by improvising, playing, surrendering control, and ultimately painting abstractly. Basiotis gravitated to these methods easily and forged important relationships with Mata, Motherwell, and Pollock. And in the following years, Basiotis and Pollock would often be lumped together and celebrated as the standard bearers of their generation. Basiotis, Pollock, and Motherwell continually drew praise from Clement Greenberg, and he wrote dramatically, quote, "The future of American painting depends on what Motherwell, Basiotis, and Pollock, and only a comparatively few others, do from now on." Next slide, please. For Basiotis, these formative years in New York City were extraordinary. In the studio, Basiotis was a man of resolution and devotion, one of a small group of artists who continued to believe that painting could carry a heavy load of meaning. He also believed his work was firmly rooted in the past and delivered an equivalent message. I kept returning to the ancient Roman wall paintings and their veiled melancholy and elegant plasticity. Basiotis struggled to reconcile his urge to utilize some of these radical techniques offered up by the Surrealists with his admiration and love of classical painting. Nonetheless, Basiotis played a leading role experimenting with automatism and biomorphic shapes throughout the 1940s. During an unusual surge of momentum, in 1947, Basiotis painted Dwarf, Cyclops, night forms, and a number of other works. Next slide, please. These mature works featured a more dominant, let's go to the next slide too, and then yes. This is Dwarf at the Museum of Modern Art. These mature works featured a more dominant shape, occupying the center of the canvas, suggesting flattened symbolic figures. Alfred Barr, the director of the Museum of Modern Art, purchased Dwarf from the museum while declaring the work to be, quote, the exaltation of the mystical, the spontaneous, and the irrational. Legend has it that Basiotis painted Dwarf while looking at a photograph of a mutilated war veteran. The horrible image of death is sublimated, transformed, and given an entirely new face. Basiotis continued to garner attention and praise through most of the late 1940s and 50s. Collected by museums, photographed for Life magazine, and participating in most of the major museum shows devoted to the New York School. But by 1955, Basiotis was spending more time painting in Reading, Pennsylvania. And according to his wife, quote, he turned away critics and dealers and even museum directors in order to avoid being caught in their web of words and wrangling and eventual compromise. His hard-fought battle to individuate himself as a painter cast Basiotis outside the prescribed boundaries of abstract expressionism. His rejection of some of the most basic orthodoxies of modernism, in particular the modeling of shape and form, ultimately exiled him. In a startling omission, Greenberg doesn't even mention Basiotis in his famous 1955 article titled American Type Painting. The punishment was now officially administered. Freed from the baggage of rhetoric, Basiotis made some of the most evolved and beautiful work from the mid-50s until his death in 1963. Eloquent and evocative paintings, expanses of color and light, linking memory to a highly personalized reality. And fortunately, most of these works reside in major museums throughout the United States. Next slide. Basiotis was included with a group of artists on the cover of Life magazine in 1951. Do you see Basiotis? 1, 2, go up 2 from the bottom and 1 to the right. The debonair fellow with a tie and a handkerchief in his pocket. Basiotis was included with a group of artists on the cover of Life magazine in 1951. This celebrated photograph was titled Irascible Group of Advanced Artists Lead Fight Against the Show. De Kooning, Pollock, Gottlieb, Reinhardt, Stern, Bucettart, Basiotis, Ernst, Brooks, Still, Motherwell, Tomlin, Newman, Rothko, and Stamels had boycotted the Metropolitan Museum's annual show devoted to American art and refused to participate in this juried exhibit. Their protest included a letter, all signed and submitted to the board of directors of the Metropolitan. The article in Life magazine made the usual claims, declaring that the director of the Metropolitan Museum had called these artists, and I quote, flat-chested pelicans strutting their intellectual wastelands. Not unlike Life magazine's feature story on Jackson Pollock in 1948, this photograph and article caused an uproar while magnificently highlighting America's appetite for controversy, fame, and celebrity. Basiotis appears proud and extremely well-groomed and stoic. Today, his legacy is possibly more bound to this photograph than anything else. So, next slide. So where is let's just go back to the picture now. So where is Basiotis in our consciousness today? Nearly 50 years after his untimely death and on the centennial of his birth in 1912. Probably somewhere at the edge of a discussion, respected but lost in the incomprehensible art world reality show of today. No astronomical prices by Basiotis recorded at auction. Not much critical attention. Michael Preble organized the last large and very beautiful show of Basiotis at the Guggenheim Venice in 2004. There was no interest, absolutely no interest in moving the show to New York. Mr. Preble appears to be carrying the torch of Basiotis all by himself. In a saner culture, Basiotis would have been safeguarded from this inexcusable neglect. It's appalling. His life and work really provides portals into the realm of mutable truths, a place where few artists dare to go. Don't be fooled by the beauty of these paintings, because Basiotis knew where he wanted to take you. In one split second, he captures you and delivers you inward. Associations implode and the artifact slips away. Unwinding silently, you find the outer limits of sensation. You may as well be sitting at the bottom of a darkened well. Because soon, your own pulse will sound like opera. Poets take you to this place. So did Basiotis. He unapologetically tapped the unconscious, that veiled and nameless world of imagination and death. He granted us that fleeting moment of exhilaration and wonder that causes the world to stand still for just seconds. He was a shooting star.
Thank you, George. Let me tell you an anecdote that took place right here in this hall years ago when his brother was being honored by the Heian Federation with the O'Merion Award. At the time, he was the American representative to the United Nations. At the same time, Amantios Vasilakis, also a fellow Phioti, was the Greek representative to the United Nations, and he was asked to introduce him. In fact, the Archbishop was here and a number of other dignitaries. So Vasilakis got up and said that, you know, Mr. Negroponte, his family comes from the island of Chios. And I'm also a fellow Phioti. And now I have to say that in Greek. He says, εμείς οι Χιώτες πάμε 2-2 ακόμα και στα Ηνωμένα Έθνη. By the way, the family of Negroponte left, I believe, in the 17th century from Chios and went up to Russia. But nevertheless, they kept their estates and used to come back to Chios. And when I asked his brother whether he'll ever go there, he said, well, why, after this, how can I not go? But he still hasn't gone there. Now, the next speaker is not known only to us, but he is known throughout the United States and beyond. He's a member of the Academy of Athens. I'll start off with that. And he has the chair of Science of Space in the Academy. He's also the president of the Greek National Council for Research and Technology. In 1999, the International Astronomical Union named the asteroid 8323 with his family name premises in his honor. I'll start with that. I could not say very much that would actually cover the whole background and biography of this man, because it would probably take up most of his time to speak. I would just say a few things. He has contributed to the majority of the American NASA unnamed space exploration programs of the solar system and beyond. He has worked at the Johns Hopkins University, where he's the head of the chair of the Space Department of Applied Physics Laboratory. And at this point, he came from Naples, Washington, to come here today. He has degrees from the University Minnesota, and a doctorate from the University of Iowa. More initially with the NASA program, he did an awful lot of work in the majority of the Voyager 1 and 2, and then he has been a co-investigator of a great deal of polar orbital systems. I probably sound stupid when it comes to talking about science, and that's why we were successful, that we were able to get him to come here to speak about the key science milestones and their relevance to HEOS, and we will now have the pleasure of feasting in only a small portion of Dr. Stamatis Trimizis' knowledge. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Trimizis.
Thank you for these wonderful words. Ladies and gentlemen, it's really a privilege and a pleasure to be here in this hall to celebrate the liberation of HEOS and the 100th anniversary of the Patriarchy Korai Society of New York. Congratulations and best wishes for the next 100 years. This is actually my second time in this hall, the first one being in 2004 during the Homeric Award dinner. And I remember that occasion very, very well. But first, let me thank Mr. Stratakis for his generous introduction and also his leadership in organizing this wonderful event. With his able and very consummate colleagues. And of course, I want to thank them all very much for finding an older picture of me to put in the program where I was still young at one time. I also must remark about the wonderful and uplifting talk of Ambassador Tsilas. And the problem we all have with in putting down the marble in our hands, in the words of the poet that he recited. That urge has to be what drives us all, both in Greece and especially in the diaspora. Finally, I have to ask your indulgence for using a slide presentation, although my predecessor did so, but he also had the text. My text is up there. It's the lifelong habit of my work with NASA. Some say space people cannot think without slides. I think that with pictures, of course, it helps us to visualize our world. So here we go. May I have the next slide, please. I will start by an experience that I had about 5 years ago when I was in Bremen at the worldwide conference of space researchers. And the president of the University of Bremen gave the welcoming remarks. And he said, I know all you people, he said, I'm a philosopher, but he says, I know all you people are interested in space, and you have often been asked the question, is there life anywhere else in the universe? And he said, that is not a new question. It has been addressed by a philosopher called Mithrodoros of Chios. And of course that attracted my attention right away. I said this, so if I can have the next slide, please. That's Mithrodoros, and he wrote a paper, manuscript, about nature back in 4th century BC, And next click. And he said, to hypothesize that Earth is the only inhabited place in the infinite universe is as irrational as to believe that in an entire field sowed with wheat, only one seed will sprout. This, ladies and gentlemen, was 2,400 years ago. It turns out that Chios was a leader in science, in antiquity as well as in art. And the next slide shows the sketch from Inopides of Chios, who lived about 450 BC, who was a mathematician and astronomer, and he was the first one to estimate the obliquity of the ecliptic. You see, as we all know, of course, the spin axis of our Earth is not perpendicular to the ecliptic, and that's why we have the seasons. And he derived a value of 24 degrees for this angle, while today we only know this still to be 23.4 degrees. You can imagine the scholarship and the ability, mathematical ability that went into that. So in the next slide, I will now move to some of the current era. But throughout the centuries, Chios, due to its location, had been a strategic objective of the great powers of its era. So it was a member of the Delian League, an ally of Sparta, then of the Athenians in the Second Athenian Alliance, then Macedonia, Rome, Byzantine Empire, Genoa, and Ottoman Turks before its liberation on November 11, 1912. If you keep on clicking, we will see something more. And it had to do with its location. Please keep on clicking. I mechanized this presentation. Please go on. And one of the things that you will see on is that it was equidistant, more or less. This is a map from 433 BC, and it was equidistant from the commercial centers of antiquity, in the Black Sea, in the next to what is today Ukraine, of course to Cyprus, to North Africa, to Sicily. So it's more or less natural that Chios had attracted the attention and developed his entrepreneurial skills and its knowledge base over the years. And also, because it was a source of wealth for the allies or occupiers, as the case may be, it avoided major destruction until, of course, 1922. In the next slide, we'll see the very well-known painting by Delacroix on the destruction of Chios. It's amazing to us today that there were 140,000 inhabitants, and out of that, 40,000 were killed, 50,000 captured and sold, and 30,000 escaped to nearby islands. Less than 15% of the population was left on Chios, and children below 3 years of age and men over 12 were slaughtered. Go on, please. Despite this catastrophe, within less than 20 years, Chios managed to recover and restore educational activities that went beyond the elementary level. Next. In 1840, Vorodados had a well-organized school where mathematics and nautical arithmetic were taught by Georgios Gelas. A few years later, in 1852, nautical mathematics and compass use and calibration are among the courses taught in the school of Rodados by Antonios Patronas, and with a detailed syllabus. They will receive recognition by the Observatory of Athens. Of course, by that time, the rest of Greece had been liberated, for contribution to navigation measurements. So you can see that within about 20 years, things really began to move educationally on the island. So I'll just give you now a few examples of notable Chiotes. Alexandros Paspatis, medical doctor, epidemiologist, and historian. At the age of 8, he escaped the 1822 slaughter and was sold for a slave. His own mother managed to buy him and gave him for adoption to Marshall P. Wilder from Boston. He was educated as an epidemiologist in Amherst College and in Paris, in Italy. He was the first to organize proper medical and financial hospital records. With detailed annual reports, he introduced statistical methods to study the spread of epidemic diseases and published significant results on cholera and tuberculosis. He spoke 16 languages. So here was a real giant of sort of modern medicine and statistics who was from Chios. Next, George Pitaulis, a well-known name in Chios, 1871 to 1922, medical doctor. He was the director of the Skilition, and in November 1912, he participated in the Battle of Epos in Chios during the liberation, where he organized the medical support for the Greek troops, turning the Church of St. George in Rhodados and schools in the broader area into a military hospital network. Next, Ioannis Vouros, 1808-1885, medical doctor, born in Chios, both parents Chians, educated in Chios.